Hello, I'm Mary Walsh, and Margaret Lawrence's The Diviners, a great Canadian book. I first read this book when it came out in 1973, 1974, and I was a young woman, 21, 22 years old, living in Toronto, trying to make it, going to school actually, but trying to, it was a feminist era. This was kind of about Morag Gunn and about her attempt to make it in the world as a woman, as an independent woman. It spoke to me in so many ways. I just read it the other day, of course, and I had no idea that The Diviners 2 was a story of Canada, that Margaret Laurence, in a heroic move, had made it not only the story of this young, independent woman who actually, when the book opens, is 47, which seemed like a great age to me at the time, now, of course, seems quite young. This independent woman, not only that story, but the story of Canada, the story of the settlement, the story of the Métis, brings in the French and the native people, the story of the Scots settlers, the story of the British imperialists, all in this great, big, messy, wonderful novel. And another reason, of course, that I loved it is Morag is an orphan whose parents die, and she gets brought up by the town scavenger, or the town garbage collector, and who is, they're poverty-stricken. It's during the Depression, but some people live in poverty and some people live in abject poverty, and I guess Morag and Christy and Prynne, his wife, Princess, they live in abject poverty in a tar paper shack on the wrong side of town. And in a way, I had a kind of split childhood too. My parents lived actually next door to us, and they had a kind of more, I guess, shanty kind of Irish kind of life. A lot of noise and drinking and Black Mariahs and that sort of stuff. And I grew up upstairs with Aunt May and Aunt Fian and Uncle Jack in a more quiet, lace curtainy kind of very, very quiet kind of life. And so I think that, in a way, Morag Gunn had two lives too. A life she could hardly remember on a farm with these two wonderful people who she remembered as her mother and father, and this other life where she was kind of the outcast in Manawaka, the garbage collector's daughter. And Christy and Prynne really spoke volumes to me when I first read it.
Morag Gunn is the central character and the protagonist of The Diviners, and we follow her throughout her life, from when she's orphaned as a young girl all the way till she's 47 years old and finishing a novel.
She looks back over her life growing up in very hard circumstances in Manawaka, in Manitoba, and just looks over her life and her love affairs and her roots, and just trying to put together who she is as a writer and as a woman.
Okay, this is the beginning, chapter 1 of The Diviners. She has a quote from Al Purdy at the very beginning, "But they had their being once and left a place to stand on," which, as it turns out, didn't mean much to me a couple of years ago, but I understand now what she means. Okay, chapter 1. The river flowed both ways. The current moved from north to south, but the wind usually came from the south, rippling the bronze-green water in the opposite direction. This apparently impossible contradiction, made apparent and possible, still fascinated Morag, even after years of river watching. The dawn mist had lifted and the morning air was filled with swallows darting so low over the river that their wings sometimes brushed the water, then spiraling and pirouetting upward again. Morag watched, trying to avoid thought, but this ploy was not successful. Peake had gone away. She must have left during the night. She'd left a note on the kitchen table, which also served as Morag's desk, and had stuck the sheet of paper into the typewriter, where Morag would be certain to find it. "Now please do not get all uptight, Ma. I can look after myself. Am going west alone, at least for now. If Gord phones, tell him I've drowned and gone floating down the river, crowned with algae and dead minnows like Ophelia." Well, you had to give the girl some marks for style of writing, slightly derivative, perhaps, but let it pass. Oh, Jesus, it was not funny. Peake was 18 only, not even dry behind the ears. Yes, she was, though. If only there hadn't been that other time when Peake took off, that really bad time. That wouldn't happen again, not like before. Morag was pretty sure it wouldn't. Not sure enough, probably. I've got too damn much work in hand to fret over Peake. Lucky me. I've got my work to take my mind off my life. At 47, that's not such a terrible state of affairs. If I hadn't been a writer, I might have been a first-rate mess at this point. Don't knock the trade. Morag read Peake's letter again, made coffee, and sat looking out at the river, which was moving quietly, its surface wrinkled by the breeze, each crease of water outlined by the sun. Naturally, the river wasn't wrinkled or creased at all. Wrong words, implying something unfluid like skin, something unenduring, prey to age. Left to itself, the river would probably go on like this, flowing deep for another 1,000,000 or so years. That would not be allowed to happen. In bygone days, Morag had once believed that nothing could be worse than killing a person. Now she perceived river slaying as something worse. No wonder the kids felt themselves to be children of the apocalypse. No boats today. Yes, one. Royland was out fishing for muskie. 74 years old this year, Royland. Eyesight terrible, but he was too stubborn to wear glasses. A marvel that he could go on working. Of course, his work did not depend upon eyesight. Some other kind of sight. A water diviner. Morag always felt she was about to learn something of great significance from him, something which would explain everything. But things remained mysterious. His work, her own, the generations, the river. Across the river, the clumps of willow bent silver green down to the water, and behind them the great maples and oaks stirred a little, their giant green tranquility disturbed only slightly by the wind. There were more dead elms this year, dry bones, the grey skeletons of trees. Soon there would be no elms left. The swallows dipped and spun into the water, a streaking of blue, black wings and bright breast feathers. How could that color be caught in words? A sort of rosy peach color. That sounded corny and was also inaccurate. I used to think words could do anything, magic, sorcery, even miracles, but no, only occasionally. The house seemed too quiet, dank. The kitchen had that sour milk and stale bread smell that Morag remembered from her childhood and which she loathed. There was, however, no sour milk or stale bread here. It must be all in the head, emanating from the emptiness of the place. Now, that was never my favorite. Her description of the maples and the elms and the swallows, and I was so bored by the natural world when I first read this book when I was 23. I had no time for it at all. All I had time for was emotion and feeling and narrative, unending narrative push forward. And so, of course, it's interesting to read it again now when I'm, I guess, less human, maybe less human-centric, more interested in the world at large, and less interested in only myself. Perhaps that's it. Perhaps that is growing up, becoming interested in something outside yourself. And of course, when I read it first, I was only interested in Morag and how she was like me and what she did that was like what I did, and how her experience was like my experience. And then I suddenly discovered that the book is actually about Canada. So that was quite eye-opening and quite non-self-centric. You know, I've read all my life and read deeply all my life, I guess, or a lot at least. And I was always looking for the story, my story. And, you know, it's extraordinary how much literature, how much 20th century literature, how much 19th century literature is all told from a middle-class point of view, isn't it? I mean, it's in the same way, I suppose, television is very, Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and even Jerry Seinfeld and everything is, everybody's middle class, if not upper class. And so if you grew up poor, you're always longing to see yourself. You hunger to see your story told, you know. And so in a way, I suppose that's why I embraced the Diviners too, was that even though she'd come from a better family, which we never did, unfortunately, she ended up with the garbage collector and his massive, voiceless wife, Prynne.
Christy Logan is, for me, one of the most memorable characters in Canadian literature. He is Morag's adoptive father. She's orphaned when she's quite young and goes to live with the Logans. And Morag is actually quite embarrassed by him because he's the local garbage collector, and he takes everyone's garbage to the nuisance grounds. She's embarrassed by him, but he adores her. And all of the events that happen around the nuisance grounds are in my head. there was a baby that was taken there because the baby was a nuisance. And it becomes this wonderful metaphor for all of the things in our lives that we don't acknowledge, that we have too much pride to acknowledge. Christy is the keeper of all of this. And it's heartbreaking because Morag doesn't appreciate him until it's almost too late. And then when she goes back to him and he passes away, she really wishes she could bury him in the nuisance grounds.
I'm just going to read a piece from where Morag decides to go to the garbage dump. She decides to go to the dump with Christy, her guardian. Something she's never done before, but she's a curious little girl. She wants to see it. So she gets up on the back. They have an old horse, Ginger. She gets up on the back on the cart with Christy and goes through the town to go to the blacksmith's to pick up a load of waste. Now they are going along the streets where some of the big houses are, big yellow brick houses or wooden houses painted really nice, lawns all neat and cut, sprinklers sprinkling, swirling around and making water rainbows, flower gardens with pink and purple petunias and red snapdragons like velvet, really rich velvet, and orange lilies with freckles on the throats. The blinds are pulled down over the front windows of the houses to keep out the heat. Cream-colored blinds all fringed with lace and tassels. The windows of the eyes closed, and the blinds are the eyelids, all creamy, fringed with lacy lashes. Blinds make the houses to be blind. Morag is enjoying this ride more than she thought she would. Then it happens, a gang of kids from her class in school, voices, yelling, whistling. Hey, there goes old man Logan on his chariot. Giddy up, hey, giddy up there, you old swayback. Hey, get a load of who's with him, eh? Got a little helper, Mr. Logan? Hey, Christy, got a new hand there? Mostly it's the boys who are yelling. Ross McVitie, Al Cates, Janie Halpern. The girls are looking away, pretending not to notice, but snickering a bit, trying to get in good with the boys. Mavis Duncan, Vanessa McLeod, Stacy Cameron. Hey, listen, how about this, eh? Then like a song, like a verse, but mean. Christy Logan's the scavenger man, gets his food from the garbage can. Laugh, 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 ha ha, hoo. One of the girls, though, which one, says for them to cut it out. But no, they won't. I got a better one. Hey, wait, listen, Ross. Morag, Morag, gets her clothes from an old flour bag. Morag is not breathing. She can't feel herself breathing. She isn't hearing either. She won't hear. She sits still, not looking at Christy. Then she realizes he has stopped the wagon, and she glances at him. Oh, Christy is grinning. He's twisting his face like different crazy masks. His tongue droops out like a dog's tongue. He crosses his eyes, and his mouth is dribbling with spit. Then he laughs. Oh, he laughs in a kind of a cackle like a loony. Silence. The kids aren't saying anything. Now Christy's face goes back to its own self. Seen enough, then, he says? Next time I'll pass the hat. Then he reaches very slowly for the whip, which he never uses on Ginger. He lifts it high in his hand. Give it to him, Christy. Hurt them. But she isn't saying the words out loud. The kids run, scattering all over the place. Christy puts the whip back and laughs like himself. Morag is crying, with her head down so as not to be seen. Christy puts a hand on her shoulder, but she shoves it away. Why'd you have to act so silly, Christy? Why'd you have to? Christy hawks and spits into the road. Only showing them what they thought they would be expecting to see then. Do you see? But she does not see. And I'll just skip to the end of this passage. He stops speaking. Morag's hair is hot around her neck, and the sweat is trickling down between her shoulder blades. Christy took the job because he fancied it. Christy, I think I'll get off and go home now. Are you not all right then, Morag? It's so hot, she says, I feel kind of sick to my stomach. Suit yourself then. So Morag does not see the nuisance grounds this day either. Christy goes on his own way, alone.
Because Canada is a place where everyone comes from somewhere else, it's really interesting in the Diviners that you have this orphan character who doesn't know her origins, and so she has to create them all the time. And she comes up with an elaborate history for the Gunn family. At the same time, her adoptive father, Christy Logan, he has his own Scottish Highlander history, and he gives Morag those stories that he's made up as well.
All of these legends and myths, Morag needs to recount them because they all kind of combine to make up who she is. Part of what this novel is about is the importance of our roots for who we are, the places where we have sprung from, and also the places we have landed.
Morag's guardian in The Diviners, the first few chapters of the book, they're all about Christy Logan, the garbage collector, who had a way with words, and in a way, of course, they say about Newfoundland is a very oral society, and Newfoundlanders have a way with words and a way with cursing and a way with all that, and so I really, Christy seemed very familiar to me. By their garbage shall ye know them, Christy yells like a preacher, a clowny preacher. I swear by the ridge of tears and by the valor of my ancestors, I say unto you, Morag gun lass, that by their bloody goddamn fucking garbage shall ye Christly well know them. The ones who eat only out of tins, the ones who have to wrap the rye bottles in old newspapers to try to hide the fact that there are so goddamn many of them. The ones who have 14,000 pill bottles the week, the ones who will be chucking out the family albums the moment the grandmother goes to her ancestors, the ones who are afraid to flush the safes down the John, them with flush Johns, in case it plugs the plumbing, and Melrose McLaren has to come and get it unstuck, and might see, as if Mel would give the 100th part of a damn. I tell you, girl, they're close as clams and twice as brainless. I see what they throw out, and I don't care a shit, but they think I do. So that's why they cannot look at me.
The manner in which The Diviners is actually told by the narrator is quite original. It would be called postmodern in terms of how it's been put together. But I think that she is one of the first writers in Canada to start to play with how the story is actually told. So she imagines things as these movie clips. She imagines photographs. She even includes almost plays, little scripts of gossip that people are saying to each other. So you'll have that on the page as well. So this inclusion of all kinds of different forms within the larger structure of a conventional novel narrative was quite original for its time.
I love this book. Margaret Laurence starts off talking about the river and ends with the river. And the book itself is like a big undulating river. And like they say, you can never swim in the same river twice. And each time I've read the book, it's been a new and different experience. It's a big, sprawling, messy river of a book. And emotionally, I understand what she means when she talks about the river flowing both ways, that the past is informing the present, the future is informing the past. I really, as I begin to talk about it, I realize I don't have a clue, but emotionally I respond to it. This is the very last page of the book. Morag walked out across the grass and looked at the river. The sun, now low, was catching the waves, sending out once more the flotilla of little lights, skimming along the green bronze surface. The water flowed from north to south, and the current was visible, but now a south wind was blowing, ruffling the water in the opposite direction, so that the river, as so often here, seemed to be flowing both ways. Look ahead into the past and back into the future until the silence. How far could anyone see into the river? Not far. Near shore in the shallows, the water was clear, and there were the clean and broken clamshells of creatures now dead, and the wavering of the underwater weed forests, and the flicker of small live fishes, and the undulating lines of gold as the sand ripples received the sun. Only slightly further out, the water deepened and kept its life from sight. Morag returned to the house to write the remaining private and fictional words and to set down her title.
Because the main character of The Diviners is a writer, I guess it naturally begs the question of how much of Margaret Laurence's own life and struggles as a writer did she actually put into this book? Not just about family history and the history of the prairies, but I think about what it's been like for her to be a woman writer trying to map out subject matter that not a lot of other people have written about. And you see that very much in the character of Morag.
Margaret Laurence is trying to turn her writer's eye on herself, and she's doing it. It's like a Russian doll effect, because
Morag is doing that as well. And perhaps we're even meant to see The Diviners as the novel that Morag has finished writing at the end of The Diviners, if that makes any sense. But it also makes sense that Laurence created a world, Manawaka, to be able to do this, that she had to have some distance in order to be able to really pull those elements out of her own experience and make a story of them.
And of course, we have that wonderful analogy between the diviner who has a rod and doesn't know how it works, but knows when they find water, and the writer who doesn't always know where the story's going or where the inspiration comes from, but is able to tap into that very powerful source and use it in their life.
Well, I've always had a very deep relationship with books because I was an only child of a large family. But I grew up with my two maiden aunts and an uncle, and my Aunt May, who, she read to me because she was lame, and so we couldn't play when we went to the park. So we'd sit in the park. I remember being in the park and Aunt May reading me the Honey Bunch stories. They were slightly before the Bobbsey twins, and then right after the Bobbsey twins, then Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden and all those guys. And then I remember the Gosling Memorial Library was down on Duckworth Street, and there was the children's section, which was downstairs, and the adult section. I remember being allowed by the librarian to go upstairs into the adult section because I read all the children's section, and she thought that I was allowed to do it 2 years before you were allowed to do it, which was massively meaningful to me. But reading has kept me going. It's informed my life. It's given me a life, really. I don't know. It used to be books and booze for me. It continues to be books and not so much the booze. But, I'm a big B girl.